I'm going to get started and welcoming everyone so that we can turn it over to this amazing panel. I'm Natalie Bethany. I am the founder of Her C-Suite, and I'm also the president of a new nonprofit, Her Health X, which we will talk about at the very end. I'll give a sentence or two about that. But Her C-Suite is where women meet, engage, and thrive in meaningful ways. And today, my hope for all of you is that you are engaging in meaningful ways. We intentionally made this a meeting and not a webinar so that you can interact with each other, send each other messages, see who's on with us. This is going to be an enriching conversation, and I cannot wait to get started. But before I even introduce anyone, we want to know from all of you, what do you know about FemTech? So we're going to pop a poll up for a minute. I'm going to ask that question, and we're going to hold it up for a few minutes, and then I'm going to be introducing our amazing panel and moderator today. So we'd love to know from all of you. We'll keep this up for a few minutes. What do you know about FemTech? And we love that there's new people to FemTech. This kind of goes with our stats, right, Bethany? I think so. So we'll keep this up for another minute, another few seconds, and then we'll show you at the end what the results are. So wonderful. All right. I'm going to get started with introducing an amazing group of women. So we're going to end that poll, Liam, and we're going to go right into this program because there's so much to talk about today. So look at that. We've got only a few founders and people that know, and it's about 50-50 that know about FemTech and are new. So that's great to know, right, Bethany? Speaking of Bethany, I am so thrilled to be here with you today. I had the amazing opportunity to meet Bethany through Priya Bathija. So if you don't know Priya, you need to know her in New Health, NYOO Health. I know that Priya is going to be with us today, and kudos to her and all the programs that she's doing that I got to meet Bethany. And then I did not know about FemTech, and I interviewed Bethany for my podcast, Her C-Suite Radio, and I was like, wow, this is so much bigger than I had any idea about. So I hope that that's going to be something that you're going to walk away from. Bethany is a healthcare innovator, and she's a FemTech attorney. She's on a mission to help thought-leading companies revolutionize the global women's health sector. She's the founder and co-CEO, founder and CEO of FemInnovation. She's a co-founder of that company, and it helps founders, clinicians, politicians, and advocates transform and disrupt standard care delivery for women's health through specially tailored legal and educational programs and thought leadership and advocacy. And I'm really thrilled for you to learn more about all the things that she's doing today, as well as our panelists. On the panel, we have Hannah George, who is a nurse, but she's also an adjunct instructor at Howard University, an adjunct professor at as well. And she is on the board. She's a medical advisor to Baby Scripts, which is a FemTech company. We have Georgie Kovacs, who is the founder of FemPower Health. She's a highly motivated and accomplished professional with over 20 years of experience. She's worked with organizations such as Pfizer, Syneos Health, IQVIA, Bristol Myers Squibb, and she's got a diverse background and a podcast. So everyone, listen to the podcast that we're talking about today. Bethany has one, Georgie has one. We want to make sure we're giving shout outs to everyone who have podcasts and programs. And I can't wait for you to learn more about the amazing things that she's doing with FemPower Health. Brittany Hawkins is with us. And again, I said this is global, so she's coming into us from England. So thank you for being here in the evening with us, Brittany. She is the co-founder and CEO of Alonza Wellness, the first online center for endometriosis. Brittany and I could talk for hours. I'm sure you're going to have questions about all the things that our panelists are going to be talking about, but she's also co-author of the book, Everything Egg Freezing. So be sure that you check that out as well. She gives the essential step-by-step guide to doing it right. And she is also a member of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, and amazing, amazing background. And I know you're going to hear a lot from her as well. And our last guest that or featured speaker that I'm going to talk about is Maytal Rasmussen. She's a chief commercial officer and board member. I had the opportunity to connect with her through actually another program for boards, and we fast realized that we are passionate about women's health. And so with all of that, I'm going to turn it over to Bethany, who is going to be talking to each of our amazing featured speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. So happy to be here and to be moderating this panel. I think it's a wealth of information we're going to provide today, along with a lot of different perspectives. And so before we dive into the actual panel discussion, I do want to take a moment and just level set what we're talking about when we're discussing FemTech. Because as Natalie showed with the poll, 50% of people don't know what FemTech is in this room. And actually 86+% of women don't know what FemTech is, whatever we consider it globally. And part of the reason for this is that FemTech is new. It was actually coined in 2016 by Ida Tin, so relatively new industry, and it emerged from the need to have a collective term through which we could discuss women's healthcare innovation and make sure that we were lifting up other women and empowering them to know and to understand their bodies. So that's really where FemTech came from. It has an overarching goal of empowerment and also allowing women to track their symptoms and their illnesses so that they can get better data to take to their providers and hopefully foster more meaningful discussions that actually tend to limit the amount of gaslighting that women have when they can show and support their illnesses with data. So that's the industry that we're coming to talk to you about today. There have been some very significant advances in FemTech over the past couple years. It went from a relatively unknown industry to over $1 billion in funding in 2021, and it continues to grow from there. And even though we're in one of the worst funding funding years back in 2022 and 2023 for women's health, we are starting to see more momentum on that front, and we're starting to see a lot more companies enter this space. So there's more than 1,700 companies in the women's health space globally focusing on digital innovation. And we have some of those innovators here and others who work closely with the FemTech field and the industry as a whole. So that's our level set. Why FemTech matters to me personally, and I'm going to ask this to each of our panelists as well, because what you'll hear is that oftentimes with FemTech, everyone has a story about why they're in this field, why it matters to them, and what they're hoping to accomplish. And I'm happy to kick it off. For me, as an attorney, I was actually thrust into the FemTech field very unexpectedly when I had a women's health challenge. I was diagnosed with fibroids very unexpectedly, and they were so large that I was actually the equivalent of 6 months pregnant, and they were crushing my internal organs. And every time I would talk to someone, they would say, "Oh, fibroids, 80% of women have that, no big deal." It actually is a big deal because my surgery took 7 hours, which is longer than a regular routine heart transplant. And yet everyone was saying this was no big deal. And I thought to myself, if 80% of men had tumors on their reproductive organs, we would have a pill by now. Why do we not have advancement in the fibroid industry in 30+ years? And so that's what really propelled me into making innovations come to market faster for women's health. And Brittany, I want to turn it over to you now to tell us about what led you to get involved with Alonza Wellness and the endometriosis field, because you're doing some incredible work in that space.
Yeah, thank you, Bethany. So for me and my co-founder, actually, it started, as Natalie mentioned, we wrote a book about egg freezing. And so we did that a few years ago. And in that process, I found out that I have PCOS, I call them one of the big three in the gynecological condition space, and was extremely frustrated. I couldn't believe that I was in my early 30s just finding out that I had this condition, that it impacted every area of my life since I had, started menstruation. So I was frustrated by that. It caused complications during my egg freezing procedure. And from there, that's when my co-founder and I decided to write a book about this. And it was really more about, how do we create this unbiased, resource driven, just to kind of go-to guide for people when there really wasn't much to, outside of what your doctor said. And that really was the sort of initiation of that we had into FemTech, and realizing how drastic the gaps in women's health data and research and knowledge are. We realized we actually worked with about 25 fertility doctors, and realized that most doctors on many fronts are working out of experience rather than data or research, because there isn't any. And so after writing our book, we got this huge outpouring of people just really just happy that they had something to use as a sort of handbook. And we then started to really focus on more of the psychosocial aspects of fertility and family building and reproductive health. And that's when roughly 50% of the people that we were helping were, and I would argue like the ones who were having the hardest time also had endometriosis. And both of us have best friends who've been struggling with this their entire lives. It's one of the most, it's now recently been coined the most common health condition you've never heard of, because it's invisible. And the pain is often dismissed as just women's issues or period problems. And clinicians just dismiss them at the earliest, as early as their first menstruation, and then it continues on from there. So that was really the opening, for us in terms of, taking all of our research and our work and our relationships with clinicians, because we really want to work hand in hand with clinicians. We feel like that's going to be the best way to move things forward in a really cohesive way. And that's where we started to build out our virtual first care engine for endo. And that's really, I mean, the story continues, if I'm honest, it's never ending. But I think it's just been honestly heartbreaking the stories are just endless. And we really, really have got to put a stop to it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Brittany. And we have a huge data gender gap whenever it comes to women's healthcare data. All of the clinical studies and clinical trials through the early 1990s were done on men. And with the assumption, right, that women were tiny men who differed only in their reproductive organs. And so we could transfer the, drugs and the cures that we were finding for men over to women without any, any modifications or any testing. And what has actually been shown is that women have more adverse reactions to drugs that are on the market. Drugs are being pulled from the market because of the amount of adverse reactions that happen to women. And all of that data, we just don't have on women's bodies right now. And so I love that companies like yours, Brittany, are really focused on trying to bridge that gap and trying to get the data that we need on women's healthcare. And there was another point you made, Brittany, too, about clinical involvement in women's health. That is huge. There's also a bit of a clinician tech founder gap in which some tech founders don't prioritize clinical involvement. And so, Hannah, I want to turn over to you next, because you do have that clinical background that you're bringing to this space. So can you tell us a bit about why you got involved in FemTech and kind of, expand on Brittany's point about why we need clinical representation in this space?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Bethany. For me, I started off as a new grad, a new RN, a registered nurse on a high-risk pregnancy floor. And I really got to see firsthand the role that a clinician plays in the patient's outcomes. I learned about how to care for high-risk patients. I learned about the signs and symptoms. I learned about how technology works. But for me, it became personal when I carried my first baby and I was diagnosed with preeclampsia. Everything changed. I mean, I became a patient. And having had the knowledge of the signs, the symptoms, how to treat it, all of that flew away so fast, because now I was the patient. I was vulnerable. I was fighting for my life and my baby's life. I am truly blessed to have found a provider who understood, but also my thinking quickly turned around, whereby I felt empowered. I used the knowledge that I know to take care of myself. I bought myself a blood pressure machine and I documented. At some point, I found an app that allowed me to put my measures in and showed me how I was doing over time. I even bought a Doppler because of my knowledge. I still ended up having complications of preeclampsia. I had a small for gestational age baby, which we call IUGR, which is intrauterine growth development, a baby that's smaller. But I really took the knowledge I had and I put it to work. And after that experience, it really dawned on me that I could make a difference in a lot of people's lives, a lot of patients. So I had years of experience with high-risk pregnancy and postpartum and LMD. then I became the patient, and I was instantly able to see what it felt like to be a patient in that situation. And ever since then, one of my life's work has really centered around health equity. And what that looks like is just access to education and information. And I've enjoyed it. I'm doing it one patient at a time, working with providers, really advocating not just for the patient, but even for the clinician. Sometimes the clinicians don't know how to ask the right questions. So that's where I come in such a way that I'm able to bridge that gap. And I look forward to the possibilities of FemTech. It's here to stay. It has so much potential for women's health, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited about these possibilities. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of bridging gaps, Georgie is doing some incredible work on that front with respect to consumer education about a lot of the women's health issues that are out there right now and the incredible solutions that are coming to light. So, Georgie, I'd love to turn it over to you next to talk about what you're doing with FemPower Health and how that can kind of be the game changer for women learning about FemTech products and women's health conditions that unfortunately are oftentimes censored and we might not be getting accurate information about.
I know. Thank you. Okay, I'll start all over again. Thank you so much, Bethany. And it's great to be with all of you today. I know many of you I hadn't met yet, so I'm looking forward to continuing to getting to know you after this. So FemPower Health started it, again, we started this with everyone has a personal story. And for me, I've been in healthcare my entire career. And interestingly enough, when the FDA mandated that women partake in clinical trials in the early 1990s, I actually wrote a paper about it. And it's crazy that all these years later, I am now in women's health. So just wild. And my favorite class in college was actually women's health studies. So apparently this has been like my thing without realizing it was my thing. But then when I struggled with infertility for 4 years, I was told it was unexplained infertility. I live in New York City. I have access to the best of the best. I'm in healthcare. I used to, I've read my, trials, and I know the data. I know the science. I was a chem major, had no fear, and I struggled. And I knew that either the doctors weren't trying hard enough or the science hadn't caught up. And it was the 10th doctor who figured out, drum roll please, that I had endometriosis. But, I think I had a lot of other things going on as well, because I know a lot of people say, oh, once you have the laparoscopic surgery, you can get pregnant. I did not. I still needed to do an IVF, and I had to do the autoimmune treatments as well. And when I did all of that, I was successful my first try, and now my son is 8. And then I got a little email from NYU. Normally don't respond to those. Sorry, NYU. And I happened to read this one, and it was a business plan competition. And so I did some research and decided to build a company called Fertility for me. And it was a semifinalist. And I was actually really glad I didn't win, because I'll be honest, with the way fundraising goes, I feel like we can get on the VC train and perhaps sometimes subconsciously lose sight of why we're doing this and what we're trying to achieve. And it's all about raising capital. And so I was glad to not have jumped on that train, because the more I researched, the more I said, wait a minute, this is not a fertility problem. We have a women's health problem. And what did it was, there was a woman who posted, and she was in her early 40s. And she said on Reddit, I don't know if I should I've always had miscarriages. I've never been pregnant. Should I use one or both of my embryos? And I wrote back to her, and I'm like, you're asking the wrong question. You need to know why you're not getting pregnant, because you will never, ever, ever, ever have better embryos than you do now. And so find that out first. And that was when it clicked. Nope, this is women's health. Like what's causing all of these health issues with so many of us? And the podcast just kind of happened because of my connections. And I'm now in my 5th season. And, what's unique is I guess I've always had that consumer piece to this, but because I worked at BioPharma, I've always had the business side. And for the podcast, my mission is don't wait for that 10th doctor. So many women have to for different conditions. So I find that 10th doctor and interview them. And a lot of them say they sweat at the end of the podcast. They're like, holy cow, that was hard. I don't over prep unless they're really nervous. I don't meet with them. It's like flat out, hi, we're going to talk about this topic. So we get really real, and I read all the authors' books, and it's been great. And so that's kind of the summary. And because I interviewed doctors and researchers and FemTech founders, you know, I see so many themes and just how much things have evolved since I first started back in, I started my fertility journey in 2010. So I'm 14 years into what is going on in women's health. So that's kind of the summary. I don't know if you wanted me to talk more about, because I know we want to get to everyone. So I don't know if you wanted me to talk about some of the high level insights, or if you want to move on and we can get back to it. Totally up to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to let Mattel introduce herself, and then we will definitely circle back on those trends and high-level insights, because Georgia, I think you have so much amazing information in there, especially because you have watched this industry transform over 14 years. And that's longer than I've been in FemTech, and I'm sure longer than most of us have been. So we'll definitely circle back. But last but not least, Mattel, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm fascinated by everybody's story here because I have a little bit of a different story. So I started my career actually in the US, in Wall Street. I was vice president of global marketing in banking. And then when the meltdown happened in 2008, actually, you think it's the worst thing ever happened to you, but maybe not. So I found myself with my own company working with hedge funds and other financial institutions. And then one small company came to me and said, can you help us? And it was the beginning of health tech. And they had an app for diabetes, for diabetic patients to track their health, not their disease. And I helped them for free. And I found out that, wow, this is purpose, this is alignment. So I kind of found my aha moment, even though I could have like an amazing probably career, who knows, but in finance, I decided that this is where I want to be, because I felt, you know, when you feel that your heart is singing. So there was an alignment with my heart and my brain and my actions and my motivation. So for the last 15 years, I've been working in different companies in commercialization for precision medicine and digital health. And I worked in technology company like Oracle that got into precision medicine, got into healthcare, mostly in oncology and, a little bit cardiology. And then I worked at Roche, which is the huge pharma and diagnostic company. It's a healthcare company that's getting into technology. I'm giving you like this because it will show why I'm getting into FemTech, which is now is a passion. And then I joined a startup, which I led so much in precision medicine and data, and the whole revolution of it in oncology, infectious disease, cardiology, diabetes. And then I joined a startup called Octave, which I just left a month ago. I was the chief commercial officer for the startup, and it took neuroscience and neurology, actually precision medicine, to market to revenue. But the focus was multiple sclerosis, and multiple sclerosis opened, in the past 3 years, opened me to what's happening in women's health. So lots of things actually happened in this 3 years in my life, actually my personal life. A family member was diagnosed at stage 4 uterus cancer, that there was no early detection. Another family member had endometriosis and could not get pregnant for many years, and now just found out. So lots of things happen. And then when multiple sclerosis, I realized that the prevalence of multiple sclerosis is 75% women. I was like, what's happening here? Like, there's such a huge gap. And so gap in care, we are 50% of the population. We are not getting the attention. So starting with clinical trials and the crisis in the 70s, and then in the 19s, maybe it started. So everything became my problem now. I feel like it's converging towards it because I see it in my personal life. We all patients, we all care for other people, we all have a friend or family or ourselves going through something that is women's health. Now, the more research I do about it, I realize that innovation will always start with the industry in FemTech, and it's about time. Now, the second thing that I'm thinking, if there is no policy about it, then policy always comes after, and there is no NIH research funding, and there's no funding. So it's policy, funding, research that is all dedicated to this. Then, you know what? We can talk and talk, but that's where we need to work also. So industry pushing the funding and pushing also the policy making and NIH, excuse me, NIH attention. So I see it as a big picture, as like a systemic problem, not, you know, each one of us fixing one thing, but women is 50%, 80% in the autoimmune, suffer from autoimmune. Now there is a new research showing that double X chromosome, which is woman, has different protein. That's where I'm coming from.
Yes, such fantastic insights. And, you know, you were mentioning the funding issues. For those who aren't familiar, women's health in general gets about 4% of healthcare research and development funding. That's it, right? 50% of the population, and we're getting 4% of the dollars. And when you look at FemTech, right, women's digital health in particular, it's a much smaller percentage than just the 4%. So by enhancing awareness of FemTech and helping to drive knowledge throughout the consumer base, but also at workplaces and, you know, within clinician offices themselves, what we're hoping to do is really drive attention and more money into this industry so we can get meaningful and clinically helpful insights and products that come to the market. And Georgie, I want to turn back to you now because you have been in the industry, you know, the longest. And so whenever I first came into this industry in 2018, I saw in the market a lot of period tracking apps, ovulation apps, a little bit of fertility tracking apps, but everything kind of centered around reproductive health and just kind of the at-home monitoring with your app. And I'd love to know, how have you seen in your career in women's health the trends changing, and what are we looking at now in terms of women's healthcare and some of the products that are coming to the market?
Sure. I mean, there's so much to share. So I guess I'll just highlight some interesting areas that I've seen. So one, as far as how it's evolved, you're right. It really more started around the reproductive health, that tracking, and then the getting pregnant part. Then what happened is, you know, you had Maven and companies like that really looking at the when you're pregnant, and then after that, you had a lot of you know, fourth trimester, so to speak, or postpartum care, like with the doulas, et cetera. And then we have hit menopause. Like, I remember doing an interview with Dr. Lara Bryden, who has been on my podcast so many times. And she had written a book. I interviewed her and I was like, menopause is next. And I'm not kidding you, like 12 months later, there were like, I think, what is it, 100 menopause telehealth startups now. So menopause is certainly having its moment. So we now have seen that there's products across the life cycle, and there are companies or across a woman's life cycle. Now, some have said there's kind of this gap with, you know, once you have a baby to when you have menopause. But I think what a lot of people don't understand is that's really usually perimenopause. And so it's all the changes in your body that can take around 10 years until you stop having your period for 12 months. And so, you know, that's kind of, because a lot of women have said, what happens then? So basically, we're now seeing things across the spectrum. And as an evolution, the companies now are starting to expand even where they focus. So obviously, as a good company, they have their MVP, focus on one area, and then they expand, but they're all going to that. And then for the consumers that are listening, you know, what is also happening is a lot of the employers are really taking on these benefits. And my big question is, how do they make a decision? Because there are so many companies in all of these areas. And that is one thing that I'm trying to figure out is how they make the decisions, because you can imagine going to the consumer. Like I just posted a quote online yesterday where it's, we women, it's not that we don't care about ourselves, it's that we're taking care of everyone else first, which is why we don't always go to the doctor. So trying to get each woman to remember to take care of herself and go get it done is hard. So that's why you see people going all to the employers, because it's a lot easier for customer acquisition. But then you have one thing I do want to say about reproductive health, because I do interview a lot of the researchers. Reproductive health, the bikini medicine was always about, we need to be able to get pregnant. However, the experts that I'm talking to, and this is so important because what I also see is women care when they can't get pregnant, or when they have their baby, or they're struggling so bad with menopause symptoms. I know moms who don't even get mammograms because they're overwhelmed. So those are kind of the triggers of when women are like, okay, I care, or period pain. And then they have to shop doctor to doctor, right? But what I want to make sure people hear is that reproductive health is your health, full stop. Because everything that happens in your reproductive years actually impacts your experience in perimenopause and postmenopause. Like bone health starts when you're young. It's not an old lady's disease, so to speak. And that was a quote from one of my interviewees who's been studying women's health since the 1970s. So she is like a goddess in this area. And then you see now, conditions like endometriosis are finally, because, you've got all these movies that are coming out, the documentaries. We happen to have a situation where the granddaughter of a congressman has endometriosis. So that helped with, getting the funding that we need. So a lot of those things are happening. And then you have innovations like ovarian cancer, trying to get a diagnostic for that. So that's coming along. Brain health, heart health. So these topics, there's just a lot more awareness. I think my question is always, when we get out of this FemTech circle, because we all know about it, I think we still have a long way to go to get the consumer to understand that these are things they need to be watching out for. And that's really hard because there's so many things coming on the market so fast. But those are just a couple of highlights and some of the trends that I've seen. And it is a shame that healthcare is capitalistic because it's kind of going to be, may the best man or woman win. The one thing I do want to just say real quick for the FemTech founders that are on this call, because I talked to a lot of PE firms and venture capitalists, and I'm like, what's really going on with this challenge with fundraising? And there's an interesting observation, and I just would love for people to consider this, is so many of us come into this because of our personal experiences, and so we're very passionate. But because of this being a capitalistic industry, unfortunately, the reality is you have to make money. There has to be a business model. And if we lead too much with the passion, I think that scares investors. And so I invite all of us to lead with data and less our story, and know our audience when we're pitching to the investors. And yeah, so I know all of us here, we're passionate, so it's like we're saying it to ourselves, but I think it was an interesting question that I had asked them, like, come on, guys, why are you not investing? And it's really numbers, especially with, so anyways, hopefully that helped. I don't know if
Incredible, Georgie. Incredible insights that you have. I too have seen a shift from just the pure apps where women can track at home more into longer term diagnostic care and also looking at longevity, right? Menopause, as you mentioned, but also the cancers, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, those have started to take some great forms in the products that are coming out for clinical trials now. One of the things you mentioned, Georgie, that I wholeheartedly agree with is we have to get the word to consumers about FemTech, right? Because there's a huge gap of consumers who don't know this industry exists for various reasons, part of which is women's health is censored whenever you look online or at social media channels. Almost every single FemTech founder has had their accounts at some point in time banned or their posts blocked and taken down, not because they're doing anything inappropriate, but because they're using anatomically correct words. And the social platforms are flagging those. they're flagging it as explicit conduct. And so it's getting taken down, even though you can have advertisements for erectile dysfunction that are totally fine. So Brittany, I want to turn to you to ask, how are you getting the word out to consumers about your product, right? I mean, I'm sure you've kind of had these similar challenges, unfortunately, with reaching consumer bases. What are some of the unique strategies that you're implementing to try to get your product out there for consumers?
Well, Georgie, you're preaching to the choir. And Bethany, yes, we actually had our Instagram shut down for reasons that we still don't really understand. We think it was the word fertility. You just never really know what the bots are looking for and how you get trapped. I mean, honestly, we only got it restarted because I'd submitted all this documentation and it was like sending, just information to the ether. I finally just had a friend who worked at Facebook who was able to kind of flag it. But other than that, I don't know how, I mean, just everything was gone. So yeah, it's a real challenge. And I mean, I can go into specifics, but what we found is because we're specifically focused on endometriosis, looking for different channels that meet people where they're at in different moments. So for example, we used paid search to highlight when, people are often in a mindset where they're actively searching out a solution because they're in pain. So that's where we're able to find, Google search ads work well. With social, some of the sort of findings that we've had is that Instagram is better for nurturing leads. So that's better for organic content. TikTok is better for lead gen. But a big thing for this, I think with a lot of women's health and specifically for endometriosis is, imagine if you've been gaslit for 7 to 10 years just to get a diagnosis, like you don't trust anyone. So trust is absolutely paramount, and trust with data, trust with just the information that you're providing, and also building a community. And so we find that the best way to get the word out is just people talking to each other. It's not easily scalable, but it is the most meaningful, and it's how, so many people have, through absolute desperation. I mean, who uses Facebook anymore except for these support groups on Facebook? These Facebook groups are sometimes like all people have. And unfortunately, they're riddled with medical misinformation. There's a lot of even like gaslighting amongst people's own stories, but it's all people have. So we've just found more referral-based systems and just making sure that we're part of that community and having that conversation. But I think, Georgie, to echo what you're saying is that, I think even the numbers, you can say there's X amount of female investors out there, but I think, and I might be misquoting this data point, but I believe it's only 6% are actual decision makers. And they are, if they're going to fight for something like endometriosis, they are going to battle in their investment community to get something like this through, because it's something where to this day, unfortunately, every person, most investors just go to their sister, their wife, their mom, and they're like, do you have this problem? If not, then it must not be a problem. And that's where these invisible conditions are really just falling by the wayside. So I think it's taking systemic, like really showcasing the pathway to scale, and doing that through strategic partners at every stage, I think is definitely at least the way that we found resonates with more investors.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Brittany. And Hannah, I want to turn to you because one of the questions that continually comes to my mind when we talk about FemTech is, all of the inequities that we have in healthcare. And specifically, we talk a lot about it in FemTech in terms of, male versus female and, the level of care we're getting as women. But I don't want us to forget, the other underserved and minority populations. And part of what worries me about FemTech is because we don't have great reimbursement strategies right now. A lot of products are going direct to consumer, and they can be costly costly for consumers, especially those who, may not have the funds to directly support their own healthcare. And you do a ton of work in health equity. And so I'd love to know how you're viewing health equity in FemTech. Where are some of the gaps? What do we need to be doing better? And how can we make sure that as an industry as a whole, we're serving the entire community?
Sure. Thank you very much, Bethany. I'd love to answer that. One of the biggest gaps that we've actually seen in FemTech with health equity work is just access to information. And I really feel like, that's a gap that is wide enough for anyone to do anything about and anyone to make a difference. So every time you either think of a product or you think about reaching out, you are reaching that vulnerable population. I really think that there's a lot of opportunity around health literacy. If you want to solve a problem, you educate anyone. There's a lot of need around health literacy. And any product or any information, any community-based approach that really helps to solve any problem will start with health literacy. Educate the patients, educate them to advocate for themselves, educate them to speak up to their providers, educate them to know that they are stakeholders of their own health outcomes. In this space, I always, with the companies I work with, because what I do is I also serve as a health equity advisor. In companies I work with, I really help them to start to think about their product and how it's actually equitable. So health equity looks different for many different people. In this space that we're in, we're talking about women's health equity. In another space, it could be end-of-life equity. Health equity. In another space, it could be vulnerable population. It could be, something that has to do with your socioeconomic status. So health equity looks different everywhere. And that's why it's so important that in FemTech, you embed it into your strategy, into your vision, into your mission. Patients need to know that they're being seen. They need to know that they're being heard. And a good product, a good FemTech product will look to improve patient engagement. How can you measure success if you're not engaging your patients, if you can't measure it? So it's so important to remember that patient engagement is a data set. You can measure it. You can look for different ways to get feedback. You can look for different ways to incorporate your changes based on feedback. There's a lot of work to be done with health equity, regardless of where you find yourself in FemTech or the approaches. But we've talked about numbers just now. We've talked about how we advocate for funding. We've talked about even females in the position. All of that is equity. So remember that health equity is not just in one population. It could be found everywhere. But a start would be to look at the population, look at helping the vulnerable population. And in helping them, I always tell my clients, I say, when you help the vulnerable population, you help everyone because it's reached everyone. If your impact reaches the vulnerable, that means you've touched everyone above them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, that is so brilliant, Hannah, and so well put. Health equity is something that is a struggle, not just in women's digital health, but, throughout healthcare in general. And of course, now that we've entered the digital age, we have digital health equity concerns, which if you're interested in that, Priya is actually a phenomenal resource on that. We have a podcast episode coming out with her in the near future. So keep that on your radar. But yeah, no, health equity is something we absolutely need to be embedding into these products from the start. It's easier to do it at the start rather than trying to reverse engineer. And if you're trying to reverse engineer these products for health equity and for marginalized groups, you can actually end up doing microaggressions, which is something I have studied quite a bit and wrote a paper on. But even the earliest FemTech companies that were out there, right? Think Clue, Glow, Flow, even think Fitbit, whenever it came out with its first period tracking app on the wearable, it actually did not let women input period cycles that were longer than 10 days. So if you had a period that was longer than 10 days, too bad, you couldn't track that data. And you were essentially being told that you fell outside the realm of what was quote unquote normal. We've seen a lot of those very early apps back in 2017 making assumptions about user bases. So for instance, they would ask you to input sexual information, and they would only give you icons with a banana that had or didn't have a condom, which then excluded the entire LGBTQ community. So thinking about health equity, thinking about who you're serving at the outset is absolutely crucial. And Maitel, I want to go to you to kind of wrap it up before we enter into our Q&A session, because you are in a different vertical of the FemTech industry, right? You're looking at things like autoimmune diseases and MS. And so I'd love for you to just take us through a bit more. What are you seeing in that space as it relates to women's healthcare? Are there any, new inventions coming out, or, what does that portion of the industry look like?
Yeah, thanks. I want to say, if you think about multiple sclerosis, it's just, it's pretty amazing. Somebody here in the chat asked, why don't we use influencers? We do. Actually, we do. There are patients that are celebrities, and they bring the attention and the attention of the population actually to certain diseases. So when you start, you will always find somebody that can advocate. It's patient advocacy. So we see that in multiple sclerosis, of course, and multiple sclerosis, the prevalence is in the US, it's 1 million people, that's it. But everybody knows about MS. It's like a rare disease, which, it's about 1 million. And then for other diseases, you don't know because of patient advocacy. So patient advocacy and advocacy group is part of the ecosystem to bring this knowledge that Hannah was just talking, because the knowledge gap is huge. I will tell you about myself in cardiology and heart problems, specifically for women. There is a huge knowledge gap. Of course, if you handle fertility, suddenly you need to advocate for yourself as a patient, as a woman, not to be, just be put outside of this, and not take, the doctors don't take a note of what you actually saying as a patient. Anyway, talking about all this, we see I see now as an industry a different approach. I think that this wave of diversity and attention to subpopulation, not just women, but women of colors, Latinos, Asians, there I can see the beginning of of precision medicine in this group. For instance, there is a company called Pandia Health that they do they're matching the it's not a patient, is a person or a woman or a girl of birth control. There's so many birth controls out there, and the physician just, they just prescribe 1 or 2 that they're used to, but there are 40 of them, and it works for different population, subpopulation differently. So the side effects, for instance, for Asians in some birth control is not the same as white women. So we start seeing this personalization of care beyond the 50%. Another thing that I see that is a big issue, and I think it was mentioned, is access to care. So 27 million American women are actually in the rural settings. They don't have access to the care that we have in New York or in the Bay Area where I live. I live in just 2 places. So when you think about that, how do you actually manage that? So there's another company that the technology is here. There's another company, Isono. What they do actually is helping with breast cancer. So breast cancer, a detection of breast cancer actually stops because women don't go to get the MRI. They hate it. They don't have access. They need to drive hours if they're in rural settings. I'm just going to say something about equity. I think that Black women has 40% more chance to die from breast cancer that can be detected just because of access or socioeconomic situation. So what we see here, that the technology that Isono brings is not, the women does not need to go to the hospital for specific or ambulatory. The technology is right there at any clinic, and any nurse can do that. So now the question is access and scheduling, so they don't have to go through the MRI.
I would love to add to a little bit to what you're saying, though, because I think this is something that's really, really important for consumers to understand and for FemTech founders to take into account. I remember working with a pharmaceutical client that, not kidding you, they had a product that would save lives for specific cancer patients, but it had to be given at a certain time. And they were working with a hospital to be able to integrate with their systems to be able to get that sorted out. And they couldn't do it because they didn't have time. And I think one thing that people need to understand, like, I know a company that has a drug that will help a lot of women. And they said, we literally have absolutely no idea who owns diagnosing this condition. And so one thing I think is really important is making sure people understand the patient journey, the healthcare provider journey, and then also what it takes to integrate, because theoretically there are so many great products out there. And if it's not going, so market access, a lot of people wait, they build their product and they're like, okay, how do we get it out there? And understanding that is like the first thing, because a great idea is just an idea. And, again, like I go back to the root of passion is great and great products are great, but it's so hard to actually get it to where it needs to go. And I think everyone just needs to understand that. And it's a really hard problem to solve. So many are trying to solve it. But it is very complex. And I just think it's something we all have to just recognize.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm just gonna end this because I think there is the sentence that's saying the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. And that's William Gibson. It's classic, right? The technology is here, the patients are here, it's gonna save life or better quality of life or better everything. But if you don't understand the commercialization journey, which is the physician journey, the patient journey, the pharma journey, and pharma
payer
needs
journey.
to be payer. That's what I'm saying. Pharma, payer, physician, patients, advocacy. You need to see it in a systemic thing. And that's why commercialization is so, so, so important. Every company that doesn't have the commercialization in the inception, it's just making it a little bit harder to get to the patient. So
Oh, yeah, 100%.
with that,
100%.
Oh, absolutely. And I know we have a couple minutes left for questions. And Natalie has been pulling the questions from the chat for us. So Natalie, I'll turn it over to you and we'll dive into some of those.
And yes, keep putting them in there. But I think one of the questions was with 50% of the population being women, what is happening in terms of education at a place like the AMA or education for the doctors that are coming up? How are they shifting their mindset and being aware of FemTech, even if it exists? And I see George's face looking skeptical, but I'd love to hear.
I mean, I can give you a couple of examples if this is helpful. Like, one, it's the societies. So if they attend the meetings, and it's still complex because not all the studies are there. Like, I'll give you an example of menopause. So this is, and again, there's lots of hope. There's amazing people like Ishwish. Their meeting is next week. They focus on sexual health. They do so much training, but it's those who are like, well, I'm interested in sexual health. Let me attend, right? So you have that factor. But like menopause. So once the study came out, the Women's Health Initiative study came out over 20 years ago, they stopped giving menopause hormone therapy to patients because everyone thought it was going to cause breast cancer, heart disease, all of these things. And my friend graduated right when that happened. And she said, I literally had to unlearn my schooling. And now, all these years later, there's different knowledge. And so now you have to go to the NOMS website to find a menopause trained doctor who decides to get certification. Otherwise, you're going to wonder, why does my OBGYN not understand this? And then as far as the FemTech, all those society meetings, the FemTech companies are trying to go to. So right now it's kind of a bit of a mess. And I know all the FemTech companies are trying to do education. But again, it's all based on research. Like I will comment on the birth control company. There are some people out there that are very concerned about people just popping birth control all the time. And so, yes, it's great to choose the right one, but is that necessarily what the person needs? Are people asking the right questions? So again, it's great to have all these things, but we have to understand the full picture, and some of the data is still questionable. So I would say it's happening, but like with all of the things we've discussed here, it's kind of in pockets.
And I've got a question for you that came up in the chat, which is how, and I think we were talking about it earlier, but really educating from a health equity perspective in the space that you're working in with both the employer side and then also, the payer side. What are you seeing as a way to even open up the dialogue? We have a lot of women here that are, at companies that would like to know and didn't know about FemTech, probably from what all of the panels are sharing. How do they start that dialogue and get started at their company?
Sure. Thank you, Natalie. So we've seen that, FemTech is in a position to really play a pivotal role in current state versus where we want to be in terms of health equity. And I always say, data doesn't lie. Use that data for those who want to have those crucial conversations, those difficult conversations within the organization. Let them start with data and showing it. You'll be amazed about how many folks, even on the executive level, don't know the data. They think it's, another pet project, or they're not sure if they want to even venture that because they're not aware as well. But start with the data, present the data and present the case. I'm huge on PDSAs in general, like the PDSA model, plan, do, study, act. Plan out the conversation, show the data, and figure out what are the small tests of change we want to see and how do we approach it. And I also want to add something. It's so important for folks to know that FemTech is not just about technology. It's really an opportunity for everyone to have a customizable, personalized approach to care. It's a way to change the way healthcare is being delivered. So if you're having those crucial conversations with the leaders in the organization, let them know that, yes, technology, it's embedded through technology, but that's not all, that's not all of what it is. It's really about folks getting that equitable care that they deserve by they see the outcomes. Again, just to really, I know we're short on time, it's impossible to be successful in FemTech if you do not include some equitable initiatives. Make sure that it's equitable all around, even from a vulnerable perspective, or from a gender perspective, or from a disease standpoint perspective. Without equity, it's impossible to measure success.
We have only a few minutes left, and this is a topic that has gone so well. Bethany, we might have to have a part 2 on this one, because I feel like this audience has been so engaged. We've had comments. Ellen has commented about her experience at the VA. I know that Lori's commented about situations with her daughter, and so much more. So I would love, we'll send out information to all of you for attending. And as I actually have had my own, as some of you know, situation with my health, but also my daughter. And that is why I co-founded a new nonprofit, Her Health X, to change health outcomes for women. And you will hear more about that coming up. And I'm excited to talk to you, Bethany, about that, and many of you about what we're going to be doing. And we're focusing on data of medical gaslighting. We're starting with that. So very wonderful to have all of you here. And just really quickly, for those of you that want to know more about her C-suite and the things that we do turnkey speaker programs like this for companies where we come in and it's all done. And so you can scan that if you have a company and you'd like to attend one of our events. And then the other thing we do are mastermind circles. One of our chairs, Lori and Lynn are on, and they're 2 of our circle chairs for our masterminds that we do for the arc of a woman's career. So I'm thankful to our panel for being here with us today. To all of you, make sure you check out Priya. She's got 2 programs today, and it's the second time that Priya and I have had programs on the same day. And I love that, because it just shows that we have amazing things happening. So please do check out all of the things in the chat. I will send out, because it's been so helpful, I will send out information about the chat and also about the organizations that you saw today. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you to our panelists, to Bethany for bringing us all together. And it has just been an amazing conversation. And Hannah, Georgie, Brittany, and Maytal, I've really enjoyed it, and I learned so much as always.